Okay, so we will begin and people can join us. So, welcome everyone. Uh, my name is Nikki Freeman. I'm the Director of Education at the Holocaust Memorial Miami Beach, and thank you so much for joining us for today's program with Jonathan Matthews. Over the next hour, we'll explore never before seen photographs of Kristallnacht, also known as the November pogrom, and these photos were taken by two Nazi photographers during November 9th and 10th, 1938. This program is part of Holocaust Education Week, which is held annually during the second week of November and coincides with the anniversary of Kristallnacht. This year marks the 85th anniversary of Kristallnacht. During the next week, we are offering educational programming that observes and considers the legacy of the Holocaust through cultural, academic, and personal perspectives in a series of enlightening film presentations, lectures, and community discussions. We are putting our website with more information about Holocaust Education Week in the chat, and we hope that you can join us for future programs this week. Before we begin, I would like to extend a special thanks to the state of Florida's Department of Education, the state of Florida's Division of Arts and Culture, the City of Miami Beach's Cultural Affair Program and Cultural Arts Council, and of course, the Greater Miami Jewish Federation for their ongoing support. It's now my pleasure to introduce Jonathan Matthews, who is now the head of digital content. He used to be the head of the photography section at Yad Vashem Archives in Jerusalem. In 2008, he began working at the Yad Vashem School of Holocaust Studies as a guide and a developer of educational material. Jonathan obtained his bachelor's and master's degree in history and linguistics at the Hebrew University, where he is currently completing his PhD in history. I would like to thank Jonathan for being here with us today. Jonathan is based in Jerusalem, Israel, and on behalf of everyone at the Holocaust Memorial, just want to say we stand in solidarity with you in Israel, and we are thinking of you and all of our colleagues at Yad Vashem right now during these very difficult times. So thank you again for joining us.
Thank you. And let's go straight into the presentation I prepared. Just a moment. And I need to look into the camera. I have to say that I got a new camera, and it's not part of my laptop anymore, but it's on the computer. So I need to now get used to look into a different direction now. So I hope I'm looking at the right direction. First of all, the reason we're doing this topic now is because we're marking 85 years to the Kristallnacht, or as you see, I wrote it down, the November pogroms. And I'll make a quick introduction about this event that happened in the week that happens around the nights of the 9th to the 10th of November, 1938. Just in general, a general statement, the Kristallnacht is the common name, but there's no official name to these events, neither an historical name nor some sort of philosophical names. I can tell you that in the name Kristallnacht, which means in German Crystal Night, is actually the name that is not common in Germany itself. You wouldn't say it because it sounds to the Germans very cynical, and in fact it was a cynical word that the people who speak the German dialect in Berlin used to talk about the fact that there was a lot of broken glass on the streets of Germany during that night. In a nutshell, after 5 years of racial laws in Nazi Germany, mainly racial segregation laws between Jews and Germans, and general policy that were supposed to squeeze the Jews out of Germany and squeeze them from their economical independence, the Nazis have become more and more extreme in the policy, not just towards Jews, but towards various populations and other countries. They reunite Germany with Austria by invading to it. They're in the meantime going to march into Czechoslovakia a few months later. And when it comes to the Jews, the Nazis have one big problem. They want the Jews out, but they don't know how to force them out. And they more and more assume to violent means to force them out. And what happens that in few nights before the Kristallnacht erupts, the Nazis have already ordered to deport Jews of foreign origin away from Germany. There was an immigration of Jews from Poland to Germany during the early 20s, 15 years beforehand. And they settled in Germany. And one of the families that is deported to Poland get stuck in a Polish border because they actually had no Polish documents with them, no Polish passports, no entry permits into Poland. So they're stuck in this border town in a refugee camp between the two places. And they called their son in Paris, called Herschel Grinspan. Herschel Grinspan was a 17-year-old teenager, and he is so angered by what happened to his family, he's Jewish, that he just goes into the German embassy and shoots the German diplomat that he sees in front desk, a person called Ernst von Rath. 3 days later, Ernst von Rath dies from his injuries. And this is exactly what the Nazis needed, to create this idea of one, because how does racism work? You don't have to say that every single Jewish person is an assassin, a killer, or a cold-blood murderer, etc. You have to make people believe that the one represents the all. That means you don't need to prove that all the Jews in Germany are behind this scene. You just need to say constantly in a very on practically a daily basis that the Jews are behind this violence. And then when one person does it, they manage to persuade all that it represents them all. So they're trying to portray their reaction to this murder as a spontaneous uprising of the German people, but we know that it was far more organized than that. And the images I'm soon going to show you represent that. Now, this becomes a huge turning point when it comes to Germany and its Jewish population. Zvi Bacharach, who was the person you can see to your left in the image, once gave a testimony to the museum in Yad Vashem, where I work, and he said, that was the heart of the problem of German Jewry. It was so much part of a German society that the Nazi blow hit it from within. Until 1938, my parents never thought of leaving Germany. There's no way the Germans we live with will continue to do these things. It's only an episode. So that's one of the reasons why for 5 years they're suffering all these laws and they deprive them from the property, etc. But there is still this hope that it's just rough times because of the Great Depression, because of people got a bit insane in the last elections. Perhaps things will get better soon. And then says that this was the atmosphere. It was also the atmosphere on Kristallnacht. They couldn't comprehend it. It came as a blow. I remember my mother standing pale and crying. I remember phoning her non-Jewish friends. She had more non-Jewish friends than Jewish friends. No answer. No one answered her. And I think this is, when you look at this testimony, I think the worst emotion that the person conveys here is the fact that they feel betrayed. They have been for years neighbors with the people who would attack them. They had normal lives. Now, step by step, things got worse, but nothing could compare them to the events that happened on that night, mainly on that night. Now, at the time, they call this week of events. We know today that actually we're talking about 5 days of events, which culminate in more. The worst moment is the night between the 9th and the 10th of November, 1938. That was the peak of these events. But that's why we call them November pogroms. Just instead of one night, we're talking about something that happens on the long term. And second of all, there was a big of a problem with the name Kristallnacht. It focuses on one thing, on the glass, which means on damage to property. True. On that night, practically all synagogues and praying place centers in Germany were destroyed. Most of the Jewish shops were destroyed, and there was the streets were scattered with glass. By the way, between the names that appeared in the Times, some called it the Grinspan affair, the same person who assassinated that diplomat. Some people called it the Blood Week or the Murder Week, and some people called it the Kristallnacht or Glassed Thursday. That was also one of the names in the Times. So we really have various names, but they all focus, apart from one name, Blood Week, they all focus on what happened to material, what happened to the buildings. And this is something I want to try to show you in a new perspective. Thanks to an album we received in Yad Vashem archives. Yad Vashem Archives today is the biggest Holocaust archives in the world today. We collect material from around the world dealing with the Holocaust. We have 220 million documents and 550,000 photos, which help us talk about this event, show it happened, to prevent Holocaust denial, etc. And this is the cover of the album we received. And the story behind this album, that it came to us from an American Jewish soldier. He was stationed in Germany post-World War II in the city of Nuremberg. And he found on one of the homes of Nazi officials in the town, a person called Julius Streicher, who was the editor of one of the Nazi main propaganda newspapers. He finds this album or these pictures, and he starts collecting them in an album of photographs. And when the family donates these images to us, we were absolutely shocked because it was the first time, received really a year ago. We saw images of the Kristallnacht that we, until now, we knew of the events that happened to the individual people, but we didn't have images of those people. One thing we need to remember at the Kristallnacht, 91 Jews were lynched on that night, which at the time was the biggest massacre the Jews covered in Germany before the Holocaust. But 30,000 were dispatched and sent to concentration camp. 700 of the Jews in the concentration camp were murdered by the Nazis, and approximately 700 committed suicide within a week after these events happened because of the shock and the feeling of betrayal, how our society, how the people we were neighbors to suddenly turns its backs against us and we feel so unprotected. But the images were always images of the streets, of burning synagogues, of destroyed synagogues post the 9th of November night. And suddenly we got new images that are very harrowing to see, I have to say. I've censored the worst photos and I've put in some of them difficult photos. So there will be some seeing difficult photos in this presentation. I am already warning you. So if you find some of the photos a bit difficult, you can always look on the other direction at the moment. And I'll tell you most of this display are photos because we are trying to show this album. But they represent the Kristallnacht as a massacre, as a pogrom, and not necessarily as just an damage to Jewish synagogues. But damage to Jewish synagogues was the claim to favor the event, and we have in this album very intimate picture of these synagogues. Here you can see one synagogue after destruction. Burning of synagogues. This was very unique to us to see such a photo when you see the Nazi guards spilling petrol gas on the wooden banks of the synagogue in order to set them on fire. This is the synagogue in one of the two towns these images were taken in full post-destruction. So you can see it really shattered the whole building, the memorial place. And this you can see the synagogue in fire itself. But now I want to go in a bit of a detail. So one of the images we found in the collection is a very disturbing one. You can see they're taking the shop, and this is the Kristallnacht, the Crystal Night in action. You can see that the people with a uniform are the Nazi soldiers involved. So you can see that it is mostly orchestrated and organized by the militias of the Nazis. And he's shattering some department store glass. So you can see the Kristall, that's where the name comes from. But notice that among the people with uniform, there are men, women, bystanders, people in the window over here, just looking and enjoying this entertainment. When I was working on some of the events in the Kristallnacht, because we are doing some sort of commemoration every year, I found in the Yad Vashem archives a very unique testimony. It was a person who was arrested after this night. He was sent in this night to a camp called Buchenwald. And after a few weeks, they released those inmates with a condition that they have to leave Germany. They have to leave their hometown, their home country. So even though he was a lawyer and he lived all his life in one country, he comes and he manages to reach Haifa, which is in northern Israel today. And he starts writing his testimony. And he said in the beginning that the events were so painful that it took it time to remember what happened. That in the beginning, he just wanted to forget everything. And then he met on the ship a person who was with him in the camp, and they started talking to each other, and this is when all the memories come back. So this testimony, he doesn't write now. He wrote it in December 1939. This means that this, according to my knowledge, this is the first Holocaust testimony we have in the world that still exists. Because before the mass extermination of Jews began, we already have people telling what they saw and what they feel. We do it now all the time. Unfortunately, we now realize how important it is to take testimony when events happen and not wait for years and see what happens to the memories. So we really try to always now to get involved in testimony collections. And look at what he says. He talks about the perpetrators. They were not just a mob, a gang of angry people, of uneducated thugs, but he said they were young academics, lawyers and physicians. They were sons of well-respected businessmen who will now forever shame the German people. I always remember the name Zander, the jeweler, who had a shop that he'd stolen from Jews on the Steintor, okay, in the address. He committed outright robbery. One of the leaders was the son of Goebbels, the merchant who had a hat shop in the corner of Georgstrasse. He plundered the shop that belonged to Zalberg. This shop sold small gifts and was under attack for a long while. Now has made it the second location for his father's hat shop. So you can see that part of the motivation of the people to join in the SS militias was the fact that there's a lot of money to gain from it, because every shop you take from one person, another person will get the shop, and we can see the sense of robbery that involved in the night. Remember, the Jewish people were in Germany, part of the racial laws forbid them from working in government offices. So they're not allowed to be teachers anymore. They're not allowed to work in hospitals anymore. They cannot be lawyers anymore. So they have the only occupation that they may able to finance themselves is through working in a shop, working in private sector. And now that's smashed, not physically smashed, but also not just physically smashed, but is also usually commandeered from them. So this is one terrible experience. Your neighbors, he knows exactly who are the people standing in front of his home. They're the ones doing it. So that shatters them. And you can see the results of these attacks, complete looting. And you can see, of course, the broken glass. Notice the fact that the people are posing to the camera. I will say a few words about that later on. But it's not just properties that are looted. There's an historian in the US called Wolf Gruner, who is actually German, but he studied a lot of these testimonies, like the one I just presented. And he said, for the Jewish people, this was a worse event, not because the financial damage it cost. You deal with financial damage, you recover your losses. You're a hardworking person, you invest in your education, so you invest in your profession so you can overcome that. That's not the problem with the property that was lost. The problem is these SS militias entering your home. You can put people under certain laws. You can prevent them from working in certain places. All the Nazi laws included prevention of relationships between Jews and Germans. Jews were not allowed to work in hospitals. Jews were not to go to the street in certain hours. They were not allowed to sit in the parks. For example, we have I just received we received in our archives a small bench. It was forbidden for Jews to sit on benches in the park. So what the lady did, she brought her own bench and then sat on her own bench in the park, so she couldn't accuse her of sitting on public benches, for example. So he just goes into the park, opens that bench and sits in it. But there was one safe place for these people, and that was their private homes. In my home, at least I can spare the atmosphere from outside. And suddenly that is desecrated. So this is one of the most traumatizing events we suddenly see in these attacks. The entrance to homes, you can see how everything is smashed and they're looking for something. So the same person I found his testimony wrote, "As I was arrested, my wife went out into the street to see what was happening. At that moment, 2 SS men came and searched every corner of my house from top to bottom. In their favor, in brackets, I can say that they did not steal every single thing in sight, as was done in other homes, but they did take a document that they found on my work desk. It was the official confirmation that I could work as a legal counselor from the Jews, and my CV, resume. Apart from that, they took all the money they could find, including breaking open my children's piggy banks. They broke into the cupboard and took out a box containing securities. They left the worthless box behind. They also took a ruby ring that my father had given my mother during their engagement." When we see these images we got last year, suddenly we see people. Notice what he's doing here. He's trying to. There was one of the classic anti-Semitic stereotypes is that Jews are hiding gold in the walls and in furniture. In the past, by the way, people did sometimes hold cash under the bed, under the blanket, and so it was when banks were not always available. But notice what they're doing. They're ripping up these very expensive armchairs with the hope of finding something inside. So you see how determined they are in this act of looting. Another example over here. Now, what's interesting here, you can see looking behind the books, perhaps there is a safe, something you can find. What's very interesting that if this photo fell out of the album, so as we opened it, what we saw in the back is the name of the photographer, the studio where he photographed this photo, but also the date, the 10th of November, which means A few hours passed, and he's already rushing to to develop this photo. For those who are young and don't necessarily know how photos were done in the past, you would get a slip called negative. You would put it in a camera. You would take the photo and you take it to studio, and he would make the hard copy out of it. So the photographer is so excited, he just rushes to take these photos to take these photos developed, so we'll have kind of a memento, a memory of that night. Now, where are they going with all these books? Usually these books will be piled outside the homes and just burned. But no, look at the faces. You can see the sense of joy and how proud they are during this event. These are perpetrators that don't think really in this idea of that what we're morally doing to victims. For them, it's just this burst of violence that they seem to be they're not following orders. Many of the Nazi perpetrators after the war just arguing they're just doing what they were told to do. But you can see this is obviously not the case in these photos. And here you can already see the victims. Some of these images, you can see the people already beating up. Forced to stand in front of the cameraman. You can see, by the way, some of the technique at the time. At the time, you didn't have flash in cameras. So there was a person standing there with a very strong light because it's nighttime. And you can see that it's on their faces. So some of the faces look very, very pale because of that. And the violence. Another one of those traumatizing events. Buses were driving in front of us, and terrible scenes took place. The SS commanders ordered on board and were immediately beaten with clubs. I ran quickly onto the bus and saw the many beaten Jews on the floor. I was able to help the teacher Levison, who had been beaten to go up on board the bus. The 72-year-old merchant, Hermann Blumenthal, who was with me in the cell in Hanover, fell and hit his head on the side of the bus. He now had an open wound above his nose and his eyes were shut. Dr. Berkowitz was struck again and again, although they were repeatedly told that he had been severely wounded during the war. They hit him on his prosthesis. Prosthesis is the false leg. He had no leg, so he had a wooden leg. Dr. Berkowitz by himself, by the way, I studied his story quite a lot because he survived the Holocaust. He faked his ID to join the German army in World War I. He was too young for army age. He was 16. So he managed to falsify his identification because he was really a patriotic German. During World War I, he was still 17, although officially was 19. And he was so heavily wounded that he was practically dead. And he went through a whole 10 years of rehabilitation where parts of his body were replaced. His leg was replaced. He had a metal plate on his head, and what they did, he had very special hats to keep that plate on him. He was the most severely wounded soldier that survived World War I. He was Jewish. So think about the humiliation when the country he loved so much, the neighbors which he fought for just merely 20 years beforehand, did it to him. Now, when he was sent to the concentration camp, he looked deformed because his body was full of injuries. His nose was broken and it was recreated and so on. So he looked kind of strange with his strange hat on his head. And when he reached the camp, one of the camp guards started making photos of him. And then these photos were then published, a typical Jew, on newspaper. Now, this is how fake news works. You look at someone, an image, you know he's Jewish, he looks kind of strange, and then you say typical Jew. Now, racism, how does it work? You take the one example and you impose it on everyone. But nobody's telling the people that he was injured for Germany, and that's why he looks so strange. So this is also part of the shock. People who gave their whole life for the country they lived in. And this is what their country does to them. Now, remember, we're at nighttime, so people are really shocked. And think of how cruel now the photographer is. The poor woman probably did not want to pose for the picture by herself. The photographer is not there by mistake. Somebody asked him to do it. He knows the people who are involved. He is actually one of the gang. If you look at this picture over here, you can see that the person is smiling to the cameraman. That means he probably knows the camera and he knows that the cameraman is on our side. sometimes we tend to look at images as a very kind of neutral way of portraying reality. But remember, every image you take on your camera, you're producers, you're directors, because you can't take a 360-degree image of reality. So you take a snapshot of what you see, but you can easily tell the person to say cheese, and then the person smiles. Is it a natural smile? No, it's not. You are directing. You're doing an act of direction. So the photographer is always doing an act of direction. So we need to ask ourselves, what is the intent of the photographer? What does he want to show us? Why is he rushing to develop those photos so quickly? And we understand that he's one of the perpetrators. He's one of the gang, and he wants to create this memory. He wants people, for him, for his children, to be proud of this event, how disgusting it may be. Now, you can see that many of those images involve fire. Well, here we're actually talking about Nazi fashion. The Nazis, the German soldiers, really liked the image of fire. And in photography, I have to say, we're talking about fire being something very aesthetic, in the sense of its, the color, it's kind of astounding, it's big. So when we see soldiers fighting in the Soviet Union and destroying villages, look how they use these images again and again and publish them, the burning destruction they leave behind them. Also, when they attack the Jewish ghettos, for example, here in Warsaw in 1944, look how they enjoy photographing the destruction, the fire. There's another motive, though. We have a young Jewish boy around the age of 15. We have an older man. We know he is a rabbi. I'll soon tell you how. And we have this woman. You can see the problem with the light when they put these lights to have these photographs. They're humiliated at this moment. And what does a cameraman do? He does a close-up. When you make photographs, remember, close-up can very quickly dehumanize a person, because the closer you're to the people, the more you see the wrinkles, the more you see the birthmarks when you're closer to them. Nobody's perfect. Nobody's face is perfect. Everybody, if you come closer, will see something. Now, the cameraman knows that. The important is you put a light on a person's face, it again makes you look more strange, more bizarre. Remember, if you look at horror films, you can see that the use of light and face is a motif that producers do, that directors do, in order to kind of show you some ugliness in the picture, or to make them scary. So the photographer is doing whatever he can to make the victim look not human. This is not new to Nazi attacks. When the Jews from the town of Würzburg in Germany are deported, look how they pick Jews that are perhaps less attractive. They always do that. That perhaps fit the stereotypes of how Jewish people supposedly should look like. And notice how in these pictures on the right, they force them to stand on a profile. Now, who is forced to stand in a profile? Usually criminals. But these are not criminals. These are people that are just happen to be deported by the Germans. And if you look at these images, look how they deliberately pick the ugliest people they can find. When I say ugly, it's not fair. Some of these people come from extreme poverty. They didn't have the ability to take care of themselves. Some of these people worked in farms, or some of these people had some physical deficiencies. But the message is they're ugly. Yeah, they are not like us. We are the master race. We are the Germans. We are the Aryan people. The Aryan people, our origins are these Germanic people. We are blonde and with blue eyes, and we're masculine and we're physically great. So they take the ugliest looking people in their perspective, not ugly in reality, and put a focus, because they want to show you the Jew as some sort of something that is other than I. By portraying the person as something who is different from me, who's not like me, what they are also arguing is it is justified. They're allowed to be hit this way because look at how worse they are than us. So in the Nazi racial ideology, the top of the pyramid of races are the Germanic people. They are the creators of culture. The Slavic people, Russians, Poles, etc., are supposed to be enslaved. The bottoms are the Roma, for example. These are what in English is a very derogatory term called gypsies. But this is the name of a group of people who are nomads, wanderers in Europe. So they are portrayed as some sort of inferior people. And the Jews in this category are subhuman. They are the biggest enemy of the German people. You can see how they like using photography to portray various people. In this case, the Roma, the New Europe nomads, they're elite. This is a German race, so you can see examples of how perfect is the German face supposed to be. And these are Germans, but they're homeless people, and they are less better Germans. The Nazis usually send people like homeless people, etc., to concentration camps. From the report of Hans Bloch, he tells us one story just to show you how people shatter behind them. And he says, when we came to the camp, there was a person who was probably a rich person. He had a big business, but that business was commandeered, confiscated, and he began to lose it. His mental stability was lost. He starts telling people around that he was about to do a deal with his staff for compensation because he's supposed to lay them off. That everything was sorted. He just has to come back to the factory to finish the deal for his staff. His staff need to get their money. And he's talking about repeating that story again and again. And it's obvious for everyone around that he's just losing it. This shock of now being in a camp, squashed 4,000 people in the hut. And then a German SS guards enters their hut in the camp. And he thinks that this person just came to listen to his story. So he repeats the story again and again to the German guard, and the German guard kind of shrugs him off. He still insists on telling his story. The German guard had enough. He takes him outside. 3 bullets have been heard, and the person who lost his mental health also lost his life at the moment. This is a traumatic moment of the Kristallnacht. Unfortunately, what the people didn't know is that what is about to happen a year later is going to be far, far worse in that night. Only 1,500 people died in Kristallnacht and its consequences. I'm talking about the people who were murdered in the camps after that and the suicide. This is dwarfed by the 6 million who will be murdered later on. So what we see in these images is a huge problem. It's how you use photography to dehumanize people, to tell these people are worth in us. So one of the main tasks in Yad Vashem when we have these collections is how we try at least to humanize them, to give back their identities and faces. One of the challenges is we don't know who these people are. Sometimes when a survivor from the town comes, we ask them, this is your town. In this case, we discovered it comes from 2 cities in Germany, Nuremberg and Fürth. Do you know the people? So we went out with a call for around the Israeli public, around American public. If anybody comes from that town, do you recognize? But now we're trying also new capabilities. For example, using AI. This is how one of our researchers was able to take a person that appears in the album. It's a French general called Charles de Gaulle, and by AI, it identified him. Honestly, I did need AI to identify this general because for historians, he's one of the most important French generals at the time. But it shows you how the system works. Perhaps we can identify. So when we started using AI, we discovered that one of the photos in the album has another copy in the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington. When we looked in the story of how come USHMM have exactly the same photo, it was written that it was found also by an American soldier, not the same one. What it tells us that American soldiers, 2 American soldiers that don't know one another, they're from separate units, they are both in Nuremberg, find these photos. It tells us that not just one copy of these photos was developed, but the Nazis apparently developed numerous photos and spread them out as if they were really celebrating the event. So you take images, today you would do it with GoPro or whatever, and you just immediately make sure that everybody on Telegram and WhatsApp gets it. So in time you didn't have Telegram or WhatsApp, but that's the mentality. Spread the image, not in the sense of show what these people suffered, but let's celebrate what we have done. But AI has its problems. The reader said, look, this image, this is from the Hall of Names of Yad Vashem. It's where we collect the material of names of victims. She appears to be very similar, according to the computer, to the lady over here. So we're testing that. I can tell you that we have used now I've contacted the Israeli Secret Services because the Israeli Secret Services, like any secret services in the world, have the best technology when it comes to facial recognition and so on. These are the people who deal with passports. These are deal with IDs. They have all the codes encrypted in. And they used various methods. Some of them think that it is this woman is in the images. Some of them think that it's not. Why we have a suspicion? Because in her report of her victim, she's listed as somebody who lived in another town. So she may have moved to Nuremberg and we don't know it. She may have walked by. Again, this is a more complicated question, but it shows you the technology we're trying to use now to identify these people, so they won't just stay anonymous victims of the Nazis. Sometimes good old methods work. I've contacted in Boston, in University in Boston, there's an expert in photography of German Jews, Professor Jonathan Zatlin, his name, and asked him, did you investigate research? And he says, you know what, this person, and this is the answer I got. I'm going to lecture on 1938 program today and use some of the pictures from the album to create the story to end to end. So he's using now for his lectures the pictures he found. He says, in doing so, I've discovered quite a bit about the synagogue in Fürth, including identifying the man who is clearly afraid, then beaten, as Rabbi Dr. Siegfried Behrens. So here we have an identification by a person, a scholar who knows the topic, and he made this research. So one person who is anonymous less. This is one of the challenges of telling the story of people after an atrocity. It's not just about just giving you a lot of facts and details showing you the people in the worst moments, people as perpetrators and as victims, perpetrators in their behavior and as victims in what they suffered. But it's also the constant need to remind ourselves we're not talking about some statistics in history. One of the most tragic things when we deal with history, that when we learn it in history books, and it doesn't matter if you study now the history of the Holocaust, history of slavery, or history of other atrocities committed in mankind, they become numbers. They lose their human identity. And we always tend to think, okay, such and such people were treated in such and such way by such and such people. And this is tragic. We're trying to prevent this. We're trying to give these people their names and identity backs. The luck, I would say in brackets, of the Holocaust, that it happened not that long ago. 75, 80 years ago means we still have people alive who saw it and experienced it. So we can still interview them. We can still see if they have family photos and they can give some material. We can still find these identities and ask these questions. Had we had these photos 50 years beforehand, I'm sure we have identified the majority of the people. But probably the majority of people who could have identified them are gone. And now we need to resort to AI or any other systems to try and give these people their identities back. But that's why when they created Yad Vashem in 1953, they gave this strange name. You know, in Miami, you have Holocaust Memorial. Very simple. You know exactly what we're talking about. Yad Vashem means monument and name. What does monument and name mean? It's a quotation from the book of Isaiah. After the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, the eunuchs came to the prophet and asked him, what remain of us now? We have no children and nobody will remember us. And he says, I shall give them within the walls of Jerusalem a monument and a name, Yad Vashem. Better than boys and girls, who are usually remembered by the next generation. So he promises something longer lasting than that, and that will not be cut off. So when they decided to adopt this term, it puts the focuses on the victims and not on the crime. That's it. Any questions?
Jonathan, that was amazing. Thank you so much for such an interesting presentation. Are there any questions from people? Feel free for the students or for anyone to unmute yourself and ask Jonathan a question.
I have a question.
Sure,
yes.
Faye.
Thanks. Good morning. Thank you. That was an outstanding, well done, well-researched presentation. Thank you. How long in its entirety would you say that the Kristallnacht lasted?
The main event do happen on the 9th, between the 9th and the 10th of November. But we have already first attacks on the 8th of November, and we already have evidence that attacks continued to the 13th of November. So we're talking about all in all 5 nights.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
Any
Feel
questions
free.
from the students in the audience?
I have a question.
Yes.
Sure.
Before October 7th, I had sent a whole bunch of information about my grandfather and his family to Yad Vashem to try to find, because I've exhausted everything everywhere else, the Red Cross, United States, everything else. So they recommended, but I'm wondering, is anybody involved in looking around for anything now with all the war going on?
Yes, we were asked specifically because we have an expertise in interviewing survivors. We're now involved in it more or less, but we do it. It's not part of our main job. We're doing it as a favor to a group of historians who have organized, have been organized in this material.
Okay, thank you.
Jonathan, we have a question from the Bob Graham Education Center. How long have you been doing research?
Well, I finished my bachelor's back in 2011, and since then I'm working in various departments here in research. I'm finishing my PhD hopefully this weekend. So yeah.
Congratulations,
So,
that's amazing.
Yeah, so I've been dealing with Yad Vashem research for the past 10 years practically. Because this is a topic which I feel close to for a very simple reason. I'm fluent in German, so most of my research deals with German-speaking material. And because I was the head of the photo archives for 3 years, then my passion is photography and history through photography. Yeah.
Are you a photographer yourself?
No, I discovered photography by accident, and it's very addictive. Yeah, once you deal with it, I think it's the most interesting medium of documentation, and also the most difficult one, because when you deal with Yad Vashem images, these images are relatively easy to watch. When you deal with Holocaust images, some of them we decided as photo archivists in the past that we're not allowing the public to see. I'm talking about the worst atrocities, not even talking about mutilated bodies and decapitations, about rape being happening. We found that some of the images are so traumatizing, we don't want them to be online. We have reports, even in Kristallnacht, of rape of women, for example. We decided not to focus on these stories. But I think it's important to say that they are there, just for people in general knowledge, because we don't want people to deny it on one hand. So we say that it happened. We mention it even to people that it's very, very disturbing to hear. However, some of these images are in my head and hopefully not outside it. Yeah, in the sense that I saw them and my staff saw them, former staff and the team. So dealing with the Holocaust image, you have to deal with also, you have to develop this barrier between you and what's happening out when what you see. You have to look at it from a very professional perspective and not from emotional, personal perspective. Yeah.
How did Yad Vashem acquire this album, and who gave it to you all?
Well, the family that had this album, it was a private collection. They kept it at home. And preservation is a very interesting question. Somebody asked that, so I want to show you again. Show you some of the photos. But when we got these images, the person who was stationed in America is actually much more important than just a random soldier. He was part of the American intelligence service. So we're talking that he's stationed in Nuremberg, and Nuremberg is a city where the Nuremberg trials happen. And when the Nuremberg trials happen, he actually gets the job of entering the home of one of the people who are accused in the trial, called look for material for investigation, for incriminating evidence. And he has all the private collection of this Julius Streicher at home. He gradually, in the 70s, sent most of the material in Yad Vashem. The reason he didn't send this album then, I presume, because he passed away, so we don't know exactly why this album he kept at home, is because it involves many photos from all his travel. in Europe during post-war. So you can see images of France and images of towns in Germany he went through up to reach Nuremberg, and those are part of the collection. So it's not an album dealing with the events, because it's not a German report like the Auschwitz album. It has a collection. So I guess it was a private memory of the time he traveled through the period, so it had more personal connections to him. His request was to donate. The son's request was to donate to Yad Vashem. The son unfortunately passed away from COVID, but the family fulfilled the son's request, and that's how it reached our collections. Now, when we got it, the preservation was a huge. Sorry, just need to end the slideshow and move to the photo. It was a huge challenge, because if I show you, I want to show you some of the raw material we had, how we got at the pages themselves. We made a scan of the conditions, how in the day we got it. First of all, I have to say the photographs themselves were in very good condition, and it shows you that the quality of the photographer, of the material they used, and that's part of the shocking. It's not just in a random camera. The person knew what he's doing. He's using the best material, so the material itself was very high quality. I want to share, however, if I look into the scans we did, now what can you see now? You can see the image, the photos themselves, or do you see the page?
We can see that. So the page of photographs, there's a bunch of photographs.
Okay, no, that's not what I want to show you. I'll just saying stop share and open the page again, and you'll do reshare. Now I'll redo it. Just a moment. Where are you? Zoom. Yeah. Here. Can you see it now?
Okay. Yes.
So this is the condition we got it. First of all, notice that the paper was crumbling. Yeah. The paper we cannot say, and we didn't really save. When we kept the papers as individual, we put a kind of what's called Japanese paper, which is very thin paper, organic paper that doesn't make sure that the images won't damage. It's a white paper. We had to reconnect the photos here. Now, the problem with these clippers is that they themselves damage the photos, because they bend every time we want to take it in and out. They bend the photo itself, and the photo is not torn, but it's what's in professional language, a photo is broken, because the photos are made of metal. So when you fold the photo, you're actually breaking it. So in order to fix the photos, we had to use a system where we use certain glue to bring the photo back together. It's a translucent glue. So we had to do it in some of the photos. Some of the photos had mold in them, so we had to get rid of the mold, because once it's in it's kept in a very moist atmosphere, then this mold is bound to happen. But what I can say that the advantage of photos in albums is that they are the fact that they're not exposed to light saves them. Do you see me flipping the photos, or do you need to reshare? Do you see me flipping the pages?
No, we can see you flipping the pages.
So there was one example I think I saw. This is what happens to a photo that was probably exposed to light. You can see how the colors in the background fade off and become yellowish. Yeah. So this is something we cannot fix. The only thing we can do is to prevent damage from happening again, for example. But generally speaking, the majority of the photos were in very good condition because they were closed in an album. If you want to keep photos for a long time, do not expose them to light. That means putting them on a wall. If you put a photo on a wall, that's fine. Make sure you have another copy, because you put it in a wall enough time, then the damage will be done by light itself. It's very, very sensitive material. So that was one of the challenges of how do we preserve the photo. Today, I can tell you that the photos are preserved in a dark room of 5 degrees centigrade. Now, I don't know what 5 degrees centigrade is in Fahrenheit, but it's just above freezing temperature, which is 0. 5 Celsius to Fahrenheit is 41 degrees. Yeah. So it's in a 41-degree room with 26% air humidity, and that's supposed to keep the photo for the next 1,500 years undamaged. So hopefully we'll keep it that way.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions?
Somebody sent on a private message a request to see if we can have it kind of send the link to the album, and it's very, very simple. I'm gonna send the link to the Yad Vashem website, to the Yad Vashem photo collections, to the album itself. And then you can just look through it and see if you find anything of interest. So I'm just gonna put that in the chat for everyone.
Are there any plans to display the album at the museum?
No, unfortunately, this is not a displayable album. Photos of it will probably be displayed in the future. However, we will not display the album because the album itself is in such precarious condition that we don't want to even take it out to make a replica. We have other albums like the Auschwitz album, which are in very good condition. So it allows us to make a replica and show it in a museum, and also there and again to take the original out for a limited time. Unfortunately, this is the album is already dead, so we have to. It's really kind of every time we're not allowing even the staff to open it anymore.
Wow.
Because every time they take one of the pages, it's crumbling more. The only time we take it out is for preservation work, and then we have we just take the risk occasionally that something may happen, even though the preservation people who work with preservation know how to work very delicately with the material.
Mm-hmm.
Here, so I'm sending a link.
So fabulous. Oh, yep, there it is in the chat. So this program has been recorded, and I will send out the recording to everyone. And in the email with the recording, I'll also make sure to include the link that Jonathan just put in the chat, so you can see the photo album yourself. Well, if there are no other questions, thank you so much, Jonathan. This was a really, really amazing presentation, and we are so grateful to have you here with us today.
Thank you.
Before we leave, I would just like to say, as I had mentioned before, this is part of Holocaust Education Week. So we have a full week of educational programming for students and adults and community members. Our next program is taking place tonight at 7 p.m. Noted Holocaust scholar Michael Berenbaum will be talking about the current situation in Israel and reflecting upon its impact on Holocaust education today. So if you would like to register for that, please, I had put the link to the registration in the chat, or you can email me. But otherwise, we hope to see you for future programs. And thank you so much again, Jonathan. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you.